Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for this online webinar about navigating higher education for students with disabilities. Hi, my name is Stephanie Gilbert. I am the Instructional Coordinator for Special Education in all secondary schools, and I am here talking with you today because I am passionate about helping students reach their personal goals. And at any time that you have any questions about navigating post-secondary life for students with disabilities, I am your person to contact here at Cecil County Public Schools, and you can email me at slgilbert@ccps.org. So let's let the journey begin. And we want to go to college. So what does that look like for a student who may need enhanced supports? This graphic is really just showing you what does today's college student look like. I think as we continue to navigate this virtual world and the face of college is changing every day, the makeup of what a college student looks like is different. Whether they're living on campus, off campus, do they have children, they don't have children, maybe we waited a couple years in between starting college, but there is a right fit for everyone. So looking at, again, that concept of what we view as a traditional student versus a non-traditional student, and really thinking about, your personal needs as a student or as a parent, helping your student through this time in their life. What will be the best fit? Will they be more of a traditional student, or is there some non-traditional aspects that they would need in order to be successful in college? So just taking a look at this information that came out of the U.S. Department of Education, it is a little old. It is 2011, so I'm sure these numbers look drastically different, but if you can see that top bar in this bar graph, it says, all young adults, about 67.4%, are enrolled in post-secondary education. Right below that are young adults with varying type disabilities at 60.1%. And underneath, it kind of goes through the different eligibility codes of students with disabilities and who are we seeing really accessing that post-secondary education. So again, this graphic is really just to reiterate that, the right college with the right supports can be for everybody. It's just really being able to identify not only within your family unit, but also with your school-based team, what are the supports in order to access general education and post-secondary education, so that your student is the most successful that they can possibly be. So here are some things to consider, and we're going to talk through this through the rest of this webinar, is just what is the student's academic, emotional, and also social needs. When we're thinking about college, they are not one size fits all, so things that we need to think about or talk about are the size of the college. Each college offers a different level of support, location. We talk about that in the sense of rural versus urban versus suburban, what type of learning style. So is virtual learning working for your student? Is that something that maybe you need to pursue when we're looking at post-secondary education? Social preferences, class styles, and also the drive of the student. How driven is the student to continue to further their education? So a couple of things that we want to make sure that parents and students understand is that there's a pretty significant difference in the legislation that garners, students accessing FAPE in a public school setting versus students accessing their education in college. So for our intensive purposes, students accessing, public school, that is overseen by the IDEA legislation. It talks that children with disabilities have the right to a free and appropriate public education, or as in the business we call that FAPE, meaning that they need to have access to general education curriculum and make progress. In order to do that, we as a school system need to provide access and modifications to the curriculum. If you look at the ADA, Americans Disabilities Act, this is the legislation that garners colleges. And the big difference here is they protect students from being discriminated based on their disability. But the biggest thing here is they provide access through accommodations, but they are not modifying the curriculum. So that is the big difference between public school and then post-secondary education. Really, to ensure that people are prepared to take that next step, we'll take that discussion and that comparison between high school and college a step further. Again, we've already talked about the two pieces of legislation that govern each level of education. Again, if we want to take it as like a tagline, IDEA is about success, where ADA is about equal access. In high school, typically students with disabilities have an IEP and or a 504. Where in college, it's a little bit different in the sense that they do not take your plans from high school. What they do is they look at your required documentation and determine what accommodations are allowable to give you access to the college setting and curriculum in the post-secondary world. This is reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And sometimes, you may need to provide additional documentation for colleges. Sometimes that can look like a full battery of assessments. And when I say the word battery, I'm talking about sometimes a cognitive assessment, an academic or an achievement assessment. So when you are looking at colleges and are looking at what supports they offer and how you apply for accommodations in college, you need to make sure that the first place that you start is the Student Services Department, so that you can understand what their process is and what the documentation that they require in order to be granted accommodations in the post-secondary world. In high school, we as a school system provide those evaluations that I just spoke about at no cost to the student or to the family. A difference in college is that those evaluations are the family's own expense. Resources obviously may be available upon request, and then there's also the possibility that your assessments from high school are still valid and will be accepted by a college. But again, some more differences to be prepared for. When we're talking about high school, our documentation really focuses on whether or not the student is eligible for services based on different disability categories. When we look at the post-secondary world, they're really looking for information on specific limitations or the demonstration for the need of accommodations in an academic environment. Some things to really keep in mind and think about is that the documentation that you present to colleges really must clearly state what the reasonable accommodations are and a clear rationale. Please keep in mind that not all requested accommodations may be considered reasonable by your higher education setting. The other thing to keep in mind is that based on the college that you attend, you may need to apply for accommodations every semester when your classes change. If we look at more differences between high school and college, the student is typically identified in high school by the school and is supported by parents and teachers. In college, a student must self-identify to the disabilities program at that college or university. And this is really important because hopefully throughout high school at your students' IEP and 504 meetings, there is long, lengthy discussions about self-advocacy and teaching students how to have that discussion on to self-disclose what their disability is and potentially what their limitations are. In high school, the primary responsibility for arranging accommodations rests solely on the school system staff. But again, if we look ahead to college, that primary responsibility is then put on the student. In high schools, teachers typically approach you if they believe you need assistance, aka you're missing work, you need extra time, the ability to provide you your accommodations. In college, though, again, you see more of that shift towards a student-centered approach where the students are required to disclose their disability and if they wish to receive accommodation. So here's the little caveat is if you are a student with disability and you would like to attend post-secondary education, you do not have to disclose your disability if you do not want to. If you are not wanting to receive any accommodations, then you have to disclose. But if you are looking for accommodations in order to access your curriculum and the college environment, then you need to work with your disabilities office and disclose with them and provide the documentation. Again, some more differences, and this is really in the scope of parental involvement. In high school, parents have access to student records and they participate in the accommodation and identification process. In college, parents do not initially have that access to students' records without the student's written consent, and that's that FERPA consent. So in college, in order for parents to be able to call and talk with the disabilities office about what's going on or help apply for accommodations, their child or your child needs to sign a waiver that you are able to access that information. High school, parents can speak to educators regarding the student and their progress. Parents can speak to educators, but students make the decision in college. And just as a side note, some colleges have required students to be present when any and all conversations regarding them are taking place with parents. In high school, we really look and support the role of a parent serving as that advocate for a student. And, you know, as the student matures and transitions to that post-secondary world, we're really looking for students to advocate for themselves. So let's talk about some programming options and some things to think about. You know, back in the beginning of this webinar, we did talk about traditional versus non-traditional. So what are some of the variations of college that we see them today? Obviously, there's that traditional four-year college. We do see some colleges opening up programs to really focus on independent living skills, two-year colleges, one-year transitional programs, postgraduate years or PG years. We do see some summer programs that are offered to students with disabilities to kind of prep them for college life before the actual college year begins. And then, like we said before, sometimes students take that gap year, do some, you know, working, or, you know, just take time off to really think about the programming options that they are interested in. So some resources specifically for students with disabilities. There's a wonderful resource. It is called College Web LD. It is an online resource tool that is free to a certain point, obviously, like most online tools. But what it does offer students who learn differently is the ability to search, compare, and review disability services at more than 400 U.S. colleges and universities. Typically, they on Web LD, they are splitting it into 3 columns: minimal, moderate, or comprehensive. Really looking at what each university is offering. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can do this by location, in which, you know, your student would like to say the East Coast, say Mid-Atlantic states. It would take, you know, the different filters that you put into this online system, and then it would come back with where each university or college fell in the levels of supports for students with disabilities. One thing that we do need to make sure that we cover today is just how do we register, or how do you register your student for the Disability Services Office. Our first things first, like we said, we want to make sure that we have obtained documentation. I know that in an earlier slide I did say that they won't take your plan, your IEP, or your 504 as a whole, but it is still important to take your last IEP or your last 504 plan and make that part of your documentation, along with a battery of assessments, a cognitive or an IQ test or an achievement academic test, or if there are some physical limitations, the last time that you had any fine motor or gross motor assessments. The second thing is to contact the disabilities office, and then the last step is to make sure that you complete an intake meeting. And at that time, at that intake meeting, they will be very clear with you about the documentation that they require at their university or college in order for your student to apply for allowable accommodations. So some helpful hints. If a post-secondary education is the track that your student is on, things to think about. Looking at the college course catalogs for where your student is interested in going, and to use that as a reference to really make sure that you understand what the class does, what the structure is. Make sure that you meet with an academic advisor to assist in scheduling your courses. You want to make sure, again, that you register with the disability program if you wish to explore accommodations. As a general rule of thumb, you should plan to study 1 hour in class and 2 to 3 hours of studying outside of class. If you are employed, make sure you have enough time to balance both. Keep a calendar, whether that's Google or that old-fashioned paper and pencil of appointments, exams, assignment due dates. Really, one of the most important things to have or establish for yourself before you graduate from high school is some type of organizational system that works for you. Do not overload yourself with too many classes in the beginning or at one time. Remember, it's important to take both a healthy balance of classes that you're interested in as well as you are required to take. So, for example, you may want to take an intro to sociology with a required math class. You want to have a balance in each semester. Attendance is imperative, especially in college, and this is one difference we did not talk about. As you all know, if your student is absent here in Cecil County Public Schools, you are getting a robocall. If they are absent consistently, you are being reached out to by school staff members. You may hear from your child's case manager. We may call an IEP meeting if their attendance is really starting to affect their progress in school. But when you go to college, there is not going to be somebody who is finding you if you are not attending. The other thing to be well aware of is that some colleges and universities have very strict attendance policies that if you miss X amount of classes, then you do not pass that course for the semester. Again, the most important thing to do when you register with that disabilities center is to make sure that you look into and understand what the available resources on campus are, what the tutoring centers look like, what are the hours, and what will work for you. Beyond academics too, I know that we have talked pretty heavily about academics, but there are some other things that you may need to consider for your student who is moving on to college is, consider their level of skill in some certain areas of what we would call functional day-to-day. Waking up, laundry, meals, medication, money sense. These are all topics that, as parents, we need to have an understanding of, will my child be able to do these things, these soft skills on their own? Should be going to a 4-year traditional college? And if they can't, what are some accommodations or things that you can set up as a precaution or just a way to ease them into living on their own? As always, our goal here is to help students not only graduate from Cecil County Public Schools, but also to support students with disabilities in what is beyond that diploma and what is beyond high school. These are conversations that should you have an IEP, you should be having at your annual IEP meetings. There are 3 pages within your student's document called their transition plan. And if their goal is to attend a post-secondary education, You should be talking about what do we need to do to get them ready. As always, if you ever have any questions about this presentation or just, anything about post-secondary life or your child's transition plan, again, my name is Stephanie Gilbert. I am the instructional coordinator for special ed for secondary schools here in Cecil County Public Schools. You can also find me at slgilbert@ccps.org. Have a wonderful night and good luck.